Morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. I suppose, what am I doing at the moment? I have kind of three areas of work. I look at consumption, or particularly non-consumption practices around the internet, which gives me scope to do basically whatever I want, whatever's happening with the internet at a particular point in time. But I've got particular interests in theories around kind of gender and sexuality as well, and so I'm actually going to be talking about some case studies this morning, one related to Ashley Madison and one related to a site that deals with public sex. And tied to all of that is an emerging interest I've got in digital methods in terms of looking at how we use digital media and to generate data in our work. And again, I want to talk about some of that today, particularly looking at some of the ethical issues that I'm kind of coming across in relation to this stuff. So if I kind of get on to I'm going to try and talk for about 30 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have a chance for a few questions, discussion. I know you have to be in the next session at 10 o'clock, so it's 9:15 now. So if it starts getting towards quarter two, will you tell me? Because I'll just go on forever if not. So kind of the background for this was me, and I'm still working through this. I've not talked about this before, so there's quite a few more words on slides than there normally would be, so I apologise for that. But the slides will all be made available anyway for you to follow. You don't have to worry too much about what's on them. It's more for me than for you. And I kind of started to think about, there was a lot of talk about the Internet of Things, and has been for some time now. What I've started to see in my work is, we've got stuff like the Internet of Things, we've got locative media, we've got algorithmic culture, we've got the politics of platforms, all this stuff kind of coming together. And rather than it being kind of Internet of Things, it's starting for me to seem like more of an Internet of Us, in the sense that we're being tagged with this stuff, and rather than the kind of IP6 enabled microwave being the important thing, it's almost like we're the IP6 thing that's being tagged, as it were, in a variety of ways. So what I want to do is talk through that kind of idea, but underlying kind of the whole thing of this move towards this so-called Internet of Us is some kind of assumption that everything is converging together and there's kind of no room for manoeuvre. And so what I want to do is just briefly talk through how I think about connection and disconnection to start with, just to kind of nuance that a little bit so it doesn't get too kind of technologically deterministic. Then what I want to do is talk through these ideas in relation to two case studies, and they're both related to a research area of mine at the moment, which is to do with dating and hooking up and apps and websites associated with that. So I've got one case study which is to do with bots as associated with the Ashley Madison site, and looking at kind of what happened to do around the hack last year, and one to do with kind of pseudonyms and scraping data from a site that facilitates public sex. And behind a lot of all that is my interest in kind of non-humans from a science and technology studies perspective. So looking at how non-human things are interfering and engaging with us in these kinds of contexts, but also how they're implicated in our methods as well. So it's looking at them as things that operate within these spaces, but also things that we might use to generate data about a situation as well. And I'm hoping this is all going to become clear as I talk through it. So, in terms of connection, there's a whole raft of theories, and I'm not going to go through all of these, that kind of emphasise connectivity, and we've been looking at this for the past 20-odd years, and probably before that as well, in relation to the internet. So, you've got Castell's stuff on network society, Nancy Dame's stuff on network collectivism, Dana Boyd's stuff on network publics, Mimi Ito's stuff in the same area. But at the same time, we also know that there are elements of disconnection around, and so we get people talking about crypto tagging, people doing like Laura Portwood Stacey talking about things like kind of lack of interest in social networking sites, people not listening in these spaces. So as much as we talk about connection, there's also this idea that there's disconnection within these spaces as well. And the way that I've worked on this recently is trying to think about this in terms of disconnected practice. So rather than us talking about connection and disconnection as two separate things, I see them as things that are intimately kind of woven together, and that so it's not about as like kind of powers might talk about, disconnection in relation to social networking sites or social media is something that we have to have like in a timeout kind of sense. We don't use Wi-Fi at weekends or whatever. It's actually, disconnection is actually integral to how we kind of operate with social media. It's almost like in one paper I've looked at, it's actually socio-economic lubricant. Because if you think about it, if you didn't have opportunities to disconnect within spaces, you wouldn't be able to operate within them. It has to be there. So companies like Facebook put in what I see as like release valves that allow us to disconnect within spaces. So for example, the messaging function is there, that is a behind the scene thing within this amazingly connected kind of environment. You don't have to like everything to be able to, or even respond to everything within the site to be able to engage with it. In fact, a lot of people use social media in a very much in a read kind of way. People talk about stalking, and I see that as a form of disconnection. It's, you don't have to be completely connected, commenting on everything, following everyone to be able to engage with this stuff, and we need to be able to do that. So my point really is for us to think of it, although I'm kind of interested in this idea of convergence and everything kind of coming together, there's always room for manoeuvre. Although I think it's that, what I want to try and show you is how difficult that room for manoeuvre can be when we don't even know what's happening with some of the stuff that we're engaged with. So a backdrop to the stuff that I want to talk to you about in relation to Ashley Madison is, and some of these methodological questions, for me comes from the area of speculative design, and the easiest way to describe that, and it is from design thinking, so it's not from IS or the social sciences more generally, it's from design studies. It's where basically designers will just drop things into particular situations. So you might be doing some participatory design where you drop in, there's something they talk about cultural probes, and they just throw it in and say, right, what's going to happen? And you're not quite sure what's going to happen with it. So the idea is just trying to generate kind of ideas, get people to engage with the design process by throwing something into a situation. There is also, at the same time, some work around now which is about speculative method, which is a very similar kind of principle. It's talking about those methods where the methods have the capacity to act themselves, but you're not quite sure in what way the method itself is going to act. So an example there is the work of, if you look at the bottom point, it's the work of Wilkie, where there were a bunch of sociologists created bots that were had written into them particular characters so that they'd operate in particular ways on Twitter to try and help people engage with discussions around kind of climate change. And so they wrote these bots, just released them into the thing, and then collected data as a result of the interactions that were developed through the bots. But they weren't quite sure quite how the bots were going to interact, what was going to happen. So it's a live method. You're not quite sure what's going to happen. So you've got this idea of speculation being implicated there. And from that, then, if you think about the principles of speculative design and speculative method, then what I want to talk about in relation to Ashley Madison is the role of speculative devices. And these are things that are basically put in place based on the conjecture of an outcome. And the bots of Ashley Madison I'm going to talk to you about, I would see as speculative devices, in that Ashley Madison or Aviva, the company behind them, rolled out these bots with some sort of idea that they were going to do something, but you're not quite sure if they are going to do what you intend them to do, and they could do other things as well. So there's ambiguity there. You're not quite sure what data or information they're going to produce or in what ways. And other examples of these are things like how algorithms might operate. So Kate Crawford and Tero Karpi have done work on looking at kind of algorithms and how they operate with Twitter and influence financial markets, for example. So you end up with algorithms affecting how Twitter operates, and then that results in kind of financial markets going up and down in unexpected ways because these non-human things kind of interact. So the case studies that I've got, like I said, I've got a background in relation to kind of dating and hooking up, and I always like to kind of remind myself of the history of things. And it's not like I'm coming to you now and saying, oh, non-humans are a new thing when it comes to dating and hooking up. Non-humans in an STS sense, and this idea of things that aren't biological, doing things in particular situations, have always been a part of dating and hooking up, whether you look at how personal adverts might influence whether or not people meet, looking at television, video dating. They've all played a part, even recreational drugs, dating agents, they're all things that have played a part in these kind of processes over the years. But when we look at this digitally, you can kind of go back to the 80s where kind of database applications get used by dating agencies instead of kind of filing cabinets. In more vernacular sense, you end up with like chat rooms and bulletin boards being used. So we've got studies from the 80s looking at that in terms of how they've kind of operated. You then kind of see towards the end of the 1990s, around 1998, 1999, sites such as Gaydar and Match.com emerging where they're using a database logic online for you to be able to search for partners, have partners presented to you, kind of in that sense. And you start to see algorithms being used in the, I mean, almost like the personality kind of, which is how eHarmony kind of organise things, advertise themselves. You know, kind of algorithms kind of emerging, and early forms of locative media where before like GPS was rolled out majorly on mobile phones, people entering, systems were asking people to enter in their postcodes so that the position of people could be calculated in a more manual kind of way, if you see what I mean. So yeah, so non-humans have been involved for quite some time. And what I want to do here is talk about like a new kind of, well, not a new, but a further instantiation, if you like, of this in relation to Ashley Madison. So I guess most of you would have heard about the Ashley Madison hack last year, so you're kind of aware of it. It was very, from my perspective, it was talked about very much as making humans almost like the centre of the controversy, and it was all about, oh, there's all these people who've been cheating on their partners using this system, and their data's been released by, you know, the I forget the impact team. That was it. So you get like 37 million account records and company documentation being released on the dark web over a period of a few weeks. You know, basically lawsuits have been filed. It's actually been suggested that it's been the whole hack was linked with people kind of committing suicide. As well, but humans were very much the centre of the controversy. But I don't know how many of you have read the work of Annalee Newitz. She wrote a series of articles based on the data from the hack, which actually I'm going to go through now, which actually show that there was actually not that many humans involved with Ashley Madison, and a lot of the accounts seem to be associated with bots that inhabit profiles. So I've not looked at any of the data, which is a whole ethical thing in itself. I've not looked at the hack data directly. All of the stuff that I'm going to talk to you about is from secondary sources that I've pulled from. A lot of it is from Annalee Newitz's stuff, and it's brilliant. The papers that she wrote in this area are amazing. I'd definitely encourage you to go read them all. Where she did get, and her mates did look at the data, and from that data dump. No, they kind of revealed that there were like over 70,000 bots, mostly configured as female, and mostly interacting with men. So they found like over 20 million messages that these bots were sending to men. And what they were doing basically were creating an environment which made it appear to particularly straight men that there were all these women out there up for a discreet encounter, as it were. So in a sense, these bots are these kind of speculative devices, as I would see them, kind of thrown into the situation by, Ashley Madison for different kinds of reasons. And I'll go into look at the reasons in a moment. But the bots were basically termed engagers by Ashley Madison, and they inhabited fake profiles known as angels. This is their language that was found from the hack. And the bots are given descriptions of how they're supposed to act. So this text is actually from the hack, and it kind of basically says, yep, the host bot mother engages, creates engagers, birth has been given, let the engager find itself a man. You have to randomise the start time so that it looks as though things are random. And interestingly, basically, this is related to the states. Wherever we have guest mails, i.e. people not paying for stuff within the site, we need to have bots to make sure that they start paying for stuff, basically. So this is kind of the narrative that this is the language that would be used by the bots. I'm not quite sure when you work out that you're chatting with a bot rather than a person. I actually created an account on Ashley Madison and locked it down straight away. It was closed. I said I was like a gay bloke here doing research, not interested in hooking up. Over a period of 3 months, I had 75 messages from women wanting to meet me. And it was locked down my account. So I reckon there were 75 bots there. I can't say with any certainty, but I think there were 75 bots there, not very intelligent bots, trying to kind of engage with me. But this is the kind of language that would kind of get used within the space. But if you look at the terms and conditions of service, the bots are mentioned in the terms and conditions of service, but they're not. That the word bot isn't used. They talk about profiles, and it says, look, you cannot meet any of the images associated with our profiles in person, and you kind of acknowledge that basically they're there just for your entertainment and to encourage your use of the service. So that it's quite clear what these bots are about in various ways. And the key one is around kind of income generation, and it operates in 2 ways. So these speculative devices are there to try and get people to spend money within the site, because basically to interact you have to buy credits so that you can send virtual gifts, so that you can chat with people, send messages, get into chat rooms, that kind of stuff. So it's a paid for service once you're in. There's an element of guest, but the bots are basically trying to get the guest members to buy stuff to spend within the site. So there's very much this direct link with income generation. But there's also this indirect link, because what these bots are doing is basically trying to make it look as though the site is populated full of people looking for fun, as it were. And so therefore it creates there's this speculative work around trying to create these conditions where you think, oh, there's all these people, so surely if I spend some money, I'm going to get somewhere, at some point. So it's working directly and indirectly, as it were. So if we look at the reasons for bot existence, this I've taken again from the terms and conditions of the site. And what they talk about is not just about how they make money. The bots are also there to kind of educate you in how you're supposed to use the site. So it's almost like the bots are there as a test bed, so you can kind of, if you can interact with a bot, then you'll learn how to interact with a woman properly as well. They're there to kind of generate market research. So basically, what was released was people's conversations with the bots as well. So they get a sense of what people's desires are, how they want to talk to people, that kind of stuff. They say that they also use the conversations to make sure that people are being compliant with the system. But there's this idea of it allows you to explore our services, they're there for entertainment purposes, but they're there to help you understand how to use the site as well. So they have all these different, all these different purposes. And if you're under any doubt about the value that these bots provide, this was released in the hack. And what you've got here is a graph which shows you how income changed when they switched the bots off for a while. So basically what you can see is that, so you've got first purchase revenue here, and then once people have bought, there's rebuy revenue. They switched the bot off at this point and switched it back on at this point, and what you see is income levels drop. So the bots are actually producing income for the site, at least in Canada over this period as well. And this idea of speculative devices and speculation in practice isn't just tied to the Ashley Madison case that I've told you about. There's numerous stories that we can find here. So, and I guess you'll be aware of some of these. But there was a story back in 2012 where Target used algorithms to basically work out when women were pregnant, and that they would then send them vouchers. And they did this with a young woman, a teenager, and her dad found out that she was pregnant because of the vouchers that she was being sent. Facebook, we're all aware of the big emotion experiment where Facebook tried to shape how people were feeling by throwing things into different news feeds and configuring news feeds in various ways. And also the disaster was Tayanu, the AI that learnt to be racist on Twitter that Microsoft developed recently. They had to take it offline after 16 hours because people started to troll it, and it learned how to be racist and very, very quickly. But the interesting thing is, and I think this is interesting for us in terms of how we do our research as well, and I'll come to this towards the end as well, is the extent to which people are learning. Yeah. So Target had done that once, and then in 2015, it did it again. It sent a baby catalogue to somebody's house, to their previous address where their parents still lived. And this was somebody who was not a teenager, a bit older. And they wrote this article about how it potentially almost spoiled the surprise of them telling the parents that they were due to have a baby, because they got all the baby catalogues of their parents, again based on algorithms and having the wrong address in the database. And similarly, again in 2014, Facebook had to apologise, because it showed somebody's, recently deceased child to them in, their year in review feature as well. So and I would see this year in review, things like the memory thing, as very much speculative devices. They're being dropped in, and I don't know about you, but the amount of people that I'm seeing talking about, I don't want to be reminded of this. And it's even gone as far as some people actually creating new accounts so that the memory feature can't follow them anymore. So they lose because they've not been able to find a way of switching it off. I think this idea of speculation is something that's really worth pursuing. So very quickly, I'm going to go through the next example. How am I doing for time? Sorry. What time is it? 25 to. Brilliant. I've got 10 minutes. Great. So this example, I'm not going to tell you what the site is for ethical reasons, but basically it's a site, and there are numerous sites out there with associated apps that facilitate hooking up in public. And part of the ethics is to do with legal stuff. So under the 2003 Sexual Offences Act, it's, in a UK context, it's illegal for anybody to have sex in a public toilet, irrespective of your gender or sexuality. It becomes illegal to have sex in public if somebody sees you. If nobody sees you, then it's all right. Quite how you navigate that one, I've got no idea. But so this is kind of quite morally charged research, and there's a long tradition of research around kind of public sex and there's some very ethically kind of morally questionable research in there. We're going right back to Humphrey's tea room trade study, where this guy would basically go pretend to be looking for sex in public toilets, study what was happening, and then would pretend to be a health services researcher and go and knock on people, get details of where they lived, follow them home without them knowing, and then go and interview them and find out about their actual life versus their kind of the stuff that was going off in these toilets. A really weird kind of stuff going off. But anyway, so. And part of the reason for looking at this as another kind of area of hooking up and involving non-humans is more methodological than anything else. So there's a whole thing around kind of the real name web, and we have to operate within the real name web, but there are still sites out there where pseudonyms are used, and you would think that that might offer you some level of cover in relation to some of these kind of activities. And we know that with the real name web, that it's there to kind of, or it's written into being as like trying to establish some kind of trust, security, protection for us within the space, but also it's necessary for commercial interest. Facebook needs to be able to say, we've got real people here, and so this data is real and you can market on the basis of this real stuff. It adds a legitimacy having the real name there rather than a pseudonym. Although in kind of with the rise of post-demographics, it's going to be interesting to see how that moves, because if you think about what happens with Netflix now, it kind of goes beyond real names, looking at these huge data sets to look at tastes and preferences, and we're starting to see much more value around these data sets that aren't necessarily attached to typical demographic information. But yeah, as I said, obviously real names are often seen as a passport to connection. Now, what I've been doing in this study is using a range of digital methods, some of which are speculative in nature, to try and understand how public sexual cultures operate where digital media is involved, but also how they operate in more general senses. So I work with a couple of other people, Patrick Wickstrom and Peter Mitchell. We started this work when I was working out of QUT, where we deployed a web scraper on this site, which we were able to do. The site let us do it quite easily, which is interesting given the nature of the site. It was very easy for the web scraper just to pull this data off. We basically pulled off data about discussions around locations where public sex happens, whether that's in a shopping mall, in a park, in a public toilet somewhere, on a beach. There's public sex locations all over the place. We've actually got a data set that covers the whole of North America, the whole of Australia, and the whole of the UK. And it's GPS based as well, so we've got coordinates for all of this. So this is just one small subset of data that I'm going to briefly talk about. So we managed to pull off 20,000 comments for this particular area for over 3,000 users across 263 locations around kind of 5,000 miles squared, and it includes rural and metropolitan sites. The data that we were able to pick up was this kind of stuff. So we were able to get some user data because within the site there's a directory of these places, but then people have user profiles as well. So there's kind of networking that happens around all of this. So we were able to get data around kind of age, ethnicity, people's sexual orientation, the extent to which they engaged in safer sex, where they listed their city as being their neighbourhood and their country. We could have got a lot more data, and we chose not to. And again, that's kind of part of the ethics stuff that I want to talk to you in a moment. In terms of the directory, we were able to, PSL is public sex location, it's kind of shorthand for that. We were able to get the category of it, so this was all structured into the database. So whether it was a washroom, whether it was a park, for example, the date it was created, there's narrative around kind of information about the site and tips for the site that we were able to get, whether there's the description of the site, whether you can get disabled access, the hours and best times associated with the site, latitude, longitude. There's narrative around kind of pet peeves and warnings. There was comments about the site as well, which I'll go into at the site itself. It had a rating, you could get the zip code, the name of it, and the city and the neighbourhood. So we were able to scrape all of that data about this site. And one of the first things that we realised, what this diagram is all the comments. So this is 22,000 comments about those locations. And what you can see, you can't, this is a JPEG, so you can't see what the words are. You'll never be able to see the words because it's been converted into graphics, so you can't go back and try and unpack it all. But basically you can see that the comments are incredibly small. Yeah, so there's not much. Every time a comment's made, it's a very, very short comment that you can kind of start to see. And once we'd scraped the data, Patrick then went through and developed a Python script to try and understand what the most common words were, and these are the ones, basically. These are the most common words that came out. So the average characters within a message was 39 characters. That's not words, that's characters, so again, very small, as I've just shown you. And it's basically anyone here around now today. And that basically told us quite a lot about what was happening, and it married very much with my ethnographic work in the area, and I've been studying this kind of stuff for the past 10 years. And yeah, it's very much about, okay, who's there, who's going to be there, what time you're going to be there. They're the big kind of, and often you would see anyone, question mark, anyone, question mark, anyone, question mark, and that would be it. In terms of, and I'm only giving you just a few tasters of some of the data because I want to talk more about some of the method stuff. I know we've got about 5 minutes left. But what we also found from the database was a lot of information around kind of, and what we're going to go back and do some more work on is the discussions around stuff. So although it was all about anyone here now, there was also embedded within the comments, and there is, if you think about that, this is just one small subset, and we're going to look at like Australia, the US, and the UK all together. There were definite narratives around kind of people talking about, are the police there? Is there security there? There's stuff around kind of good, if it's a good layout. So like if a door bangs, that's seen as good because it means that you can sort yourself out before somebody comes in, as it were, so you don't get seen and stuff. So there's lots more discussion and narrative around how public sector operates within the site. And so what we're going to be able to do is then use Python scripts again, because there's no way we can do this manually. I started to try and code the stuff manually, and I'm doing it for the 22,000 comments. But trying to do it for, I think, there's over 250,000 comments that we've got. And we're using Python scripts to then basically kind of say, okay, let's go look for police and look at that police in combination with another word. So we can actually do combinations of words to try and, as we make sense of the data, to try and understand what the cultures are and the discussions are around this. And a big kind of reason for me being interested in this, I've got interested in public health. And there are significant public health questions that you can interrogate in this kind of data around kind of safer sex practice with these kinds of data sets. I'm not going to talk through that because I want to get on to some of the final bit about ethics, as it were, and then give a chance to have some conversation. So, first, pseudonymity does not mean anonymity. But what was interesting is when we use the scraper, and this is where some of the speculation stuff comes in. It didn't, even though we were picking off people's profile data, we didn't realise it was going to do it, but the scraper automatically anonymised the data set. So all we have is a number. There is no way you can tie this data set back to anybody. And that was kind of quite an interesting, we thought we were going to have to find a way of anonymising the data, because one of the big things that I've worried about, and I spoke to so many people around doing this, was the data set getting into the wrong hands, or us being asked for the data set, say, by the police. But anybody can go and scrape this stuff if you know where to go and know how to do it. But we just had to be really careful about thinking about, well, not helping people to be able to do that. So the scraping actually led to an anonymity, which was an interesting thing. We've been using a piece of software called CartoDB, which is mapping software. But when I would never show you the maps, because basically what I wanted to do was map discourse and say, oh, well, what's being talked about where, for example, and at what time. You can do all these fantastic kind of data visualizations, but ethically it's just not appropriate to do that, because from an ethics perspective, and this is interesting, where ethics panels don't really understand what you're doing and are focused on certain things in particular ways. If you think about ethics panels, are focused very much on causing harm to an individual or a group of people. The way that we could cause harm to individuals and people is not through their individual data, because it's completely anonymous. Even if we'd have picked up even more data and scraped more data, which we could have done, we just took what we thought we needed rather than everything. It's incredibly anonymous. It's only once you start seeing photographs of people and maybe some of their pseudonyms, which some people actually do pseudonyms which are their first name and last name in this space, believe it or not. It's not all, but, sorry, where was I going with that? Yes, but the important thing, was not the individual, it's the ethics of location. And that's the thing that actually ethics panels don't think about. And so they weren't really bothered about us showing where this stuff was happening. So I could draw you a map and show you all of the public sex locations within the UK. And I'd just show you, and given that this is particularly associated with men who have sex with men, and often men who are not out or who would define themselves as straight, who might be married or in a relationship with somebody else, and you're dealing with kind of potentially illegal activity, you can see how ethically charged and tricky this work kind of becomes. So there's, no public showing of the mapping. I've been careful not to tell you about the places in any way. It'd be very easy for me to talk about very specific, kind of shopping malls or universities or whatever, or even university buildings where things are happening. But that doesn't happen. I won't get involved with quoting detailed comments, because even though I've checked and this stuff isn't Googleable, you have to think about things like the aggregation effect, and they might become Googleable in the future. And what happens if somebody got hold of this data set and combined it with something else, and then it means it becomes less anonymous in some kind of way as well. But also throughout this, which is consent hasn't been obtained. There is no way we could get consent from everybody to do this. And in fact, the larger the data set, the safer it is for individuals, because they just get lost in the massive amount of data that we have. The trickier one is the extent to which, and I've actually had to kind of speak to some of my legal scholar friends about this, the trickier one is the extent to which what we've done is in line with the terms and conditions of the site itself. And obviously we're not looking to make money out of this data set, which I think is one of the things that they're majorly concerned about. But there is a whole question here about, for us, I think just generally around how we get data that is incredibly valuable from proprietary platforms when they're saying we're not supposed to be doing this. And you have to kind of make some kind of judgment call around whether or not they're going to come after you and say you've done, like try and sue you or something for taking data. And I haven't got the answer to that one. So really finally, what I've been trying to talk about through these cases, I'll be doing in a second, actually. What I've been trying to get through all of this then is, if we're thinking about kind of using the idea that like there are speculative devices out there, we've got kind of speculative methods, we've got automated ways of trying to do this in this kind of increasingly kind of converged environment. I think it leaves, and I haven't got the answers, but it leaves some really interesting and significant implications for us in terms of how we engage with research in this area, just in terms of how we generate data and how that, as we generate that data, how we process that data as well. So that idea of the scraping kind of leading to anonymity, for example. We've then got questions around then, once we've got that data, how we present it as well. So that idea, well, I could use CartoDB, but I've not, you know. And so it's decision. And then archiving as well. And one of the big things for me, particularly with the second data set, is the extent to which we keep hold of the data set once we've done it. I mean, we've definitely deleted the scraping script so that nobody can ask us for it. I mean, somebody can go and develop their own, but delete it. And we're trying to put in protection, but there's that whole thing about, well, you know, you're kind of supposed to keep a data set around, and in the UK context, the research councils want you to make that data set open. I think there's some really interesting stuff around how we deal with archiving these data sets. And so really my kind of parting point really is, look, we're delegating, if we kind of engage with speculative devices and speculative method, we're basically delegating some of the work of what we would do to non-humans, and we can't always be sure what the outcomes of that is going to be. And so we really kind of, if I was like, I'd put up here, if we take an extreme philosophical position on this, I think it potentially becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to stay up front what the ethical implications of our work are when we're actually applying for ethical approval. But what we have to do is try and have a best guess and then think about how we're going to respond to stuff once we see things happening in ways in which, for example, Facebook and Target have not, in a sense, and have continued to carry on doing what they do. So we kind of just need to be kind of, if we're going to engage this stuff, we need to be clear about what the speculations are and what they could be, and then adjust as we move forward. And I'll finish at that point. No problem.